So let's begin. Welcome, everyone. I'm Rabbi Micah Streifer, and I'm the director of Laasok. I am very excited to be back with all of you and to welcome you back as we continue our journey through social justice in our texts. This is the fourth installment of this very important series, and I'm really glad that you're all here for the discussion. As many of you know, Laasok is a virtual liberal Beit Midrash. We're a community of learners studying our sacred texts through a progressive Jewish lens and in an inclusive environment. If you enjoy this learning and you're interested in studying in looking into other study options, then just drop me a note into the chat and I'll reach out to you. I'm just going to say hi in the chat so you know who I am. And I would love to hear from you if you want to look into other study options through Laasok. Before we begin, our thoughts go out to all of those in the Los Angeles area. And I know some of the participants in our community are from the Southern California area. We hope that you're staying safe. We are thinking about you and praying for a speedy end to this terrible situation. I want to convey deep thanks to two members of the Laasok community who helped make this program possible, and that's Robert Goldman and Lauren Davis, as well as all of you who made contributions to support this program. In a few minutes, I'll drop into the chat a link. If you'd like to support Laasok through a tax-deductible donation, you can do so, and we're grateful for your support. I'm also very grateful and proud of all of our partner organizations who've come together to make this series possible. I'm just going to list them off quickly. They are the Central Conference of American Rabbis and the CCAR Press, Tzedek Box, Dayenu, a Jewish call for climate justice, the Union for Reform Judaism, Kirva, Keeping It Sacred, Central Synagogue, Temple Israel of Greater Miami, and Temple of Israel in Wilmington, North Carolina. Now, as we did last time, I want to start by turning things over for a moment to Rabbi Andrew Kaplan Mandel, who represents two of our partners, Central Synagogue and Tzedek Box, to help us to set an intention for this study. Rabbi, take it away.
Thank you so much. As with every month, we take a moment to ensure that the work that we do, the dedication that we demonstrate toward issues of justice and righteousness are not simply about study alone, but are also related to action we take in the world. So whether that's offering support to those devastated by fire in California, or lobbying to make change for a cause important to you, or volunteering, let's take a moment to jot down something that we have done, or how we felt, or what we learned about the experience as a way to seal that action in our minds and in our hearts, and consider what we might continue doing to continue our momentum or impact. So let's take a moment to do that now. I'll offer a bit of a nigun while folks take a moment to jot down on a slip of paper what they are up to in the world of action. Yada dai 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 dai, yada dai 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 dai, yada dai 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 dai, yada dai dai dai, yada dai, yada dai 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 dai, yada dai dai dai, yada dai, yada dai dai dai, yada dai, yada dai dai dai. Ya dai 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 dai, ya da dai 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 da da dai dai dai, yai dai 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 dai, da dai dai dai, yai dai dai dai, ya da dai 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 da da dai dai dai, yai dai 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 dai. Yai, dai, dai, dai. And you can put that slip of paper in your Tzedek box and save it for Yom HaTzedek in May when we review our year's worth of actions. Back to you, Rabbi.
Wonderful, thank you. A couple of quick technical notes, and then I'll introduce our speaker. First, because we're on Zoom and because there are a lot of us, we are going to ask you to stay muted during this session. However, we do intend this to be interactive and as a discussion. So if you have thoughts or comments to share, please feel free to either raise your hand electronically, which you can do in the reactions at the bottom, or put your thoughts into the chat. I happen to know that Rabbi Leah Berkowitz is quite good at keeping track of the chat, but I'll also keep track of the chat and let her know if there are comments or questions. And finally, all comments in the chat do need to be pertinent to the topic at hand. Any comments that are not about what we're talking about, we're going to have to delete. We appreciate your understanding. These things can be challenging to manage with a large group. And with that, let me introduce our speaker. Rabbi Leah Berkowitz is a Philly-based freelance teacher and writer. She currently teaches for the Union for Reform Judaism, the Jewish Learning Collaborative, and Laasok. She's the co-author of a middle grade midrash collection called Maybe It Happened This Way, Bible Stories Reimagined. I love some of the stories in that collection. She's also published short pieces in The Sacred Exchange and Prophetic Voices, both of which were published by CCAR Press, one of our partners. I'm going to share my screen so that we can say the blessing for study together. And then I'll turn things right over to Rabbi Leah Berkowitz. Please join me. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Blessed are you, eternal source of the universe, whose commandments, whose mitzvot, make our lives holy, and who commands us to immerse ourselves, to engage ourselves, la'asok, in words of Torah. And I'll turn things over to Rabbi Leah Berkowitz.
Hi, everybody. Good afternoon, or whatever time it is where you are. I saw someone I know from South Africa, from Cape Town. So I know we've got lots of different time zones covered. And let me just get us situated screen-wise. Okay. So the material that we're going to be looking at today comes from the Pardes Institute of North America. They run a program and have a curriculum called Machloket Matters, which is about how to disagree constructively, which felt very relevant when I signed up to take this class and only gets more relevant every day. The word machloket comes from the Hebrew root meaning to divide, separate, or split. And it's often used to refer to disagreements in rabbinic literature. So if you've been studying with Laasok a lot, you might be familiar with either with the word machloket or the concept of machloket. So I decided to take this fellowship and learn how to use this curriculum in this past spring in response to growing tensions in my community, and I think in all communities, surrounding the situation in the Middle East and in anticipation of a contentious election here in the United States. I'm not going to talk about either of those things today, and in discussions, I'll try to keep conversations about those things in the abstract. This program is really more designed to give us tools, both psychological and spiritual and also textual, to get proximate with people with whom we disagree. So I wanted to start with this poem by Yehuda Amichai, which coincidentally appears as an alternative Haftarah in Prophetic Voices, which is the new CCAR Haftarah commentary. This is Yehuda Amichai. From the place where we are right, flowers will never grow in the spring. The place where we are right is hard and trampled like a yard. But doubts and loves dig up the world like a mole, a plow, and a whisper will be heard in the place where the ruined house once stood. This poem serves as a reminder that growth requires openness and humility. Stubbornly clinging to our need to be right, and we've all done it, might keep the ground beneath our feet feeling firm, but it also renders it too dry and too hardened for anything to grow there. And we've probably all experienced this in one way or another, especially in recent years, either ourselves being really stubborn and stuck in one place, or the person that whose mind we're trying to change being stuck in one place, but probably both. So according to the Jewish tradition, Yehuda Amichai at this point does sort of count as rabbinic text in a lot of settings. But if we want to go back to the ancient rabbis and look at Midrash, the idea here is that if we want to cultivate any kind of understanding, we need to first break ourselves down, crack ourselves open. We need to be vulnerable. And we see this in this Midrash from Numbers Rabbah. The Eternal spoke to Moses in the wilderness of Sinai, the word wilderness being Bamidbar. And the word speak is Midaber. It is that anyone who does not render themselves like a wilderness, like a midbar, accessible to all, is unable to acquire wisdom and the Torah. That is why it is stated in the wilderness of Sinai. So according to this text, we can only receive Torah in the wilderness. And in this case, the wilderness is being described as accessible, but it also can be this, coming back to the Yehuda Amichai poem, this place where there's wild growth, this place where there's barrenness, where there's space, where the ground is aerated, that there is more potential for growth and learning in spaces like that. So questioning and debate are essential parts of our sacred story, from Abraham arguing with God over the punishment of Sodom and Gomorrah, to the daughters of Zelophehad challenging misogynistic inheritance laws in the desert. We also see throughout rabbinical literature examples of rabbis arguing in order to sharpen their own skills, and once in a while just for the fun of it. The rabbis love a good argument. They also love a good wordplay. If we're lucky, we'll see both. Okay, so our rabbis liked to argue, and as I said, we still do. We like it almost as much as what we would call dad jokes. And in Pirkei Avot, in the Mishnah, which is from the 2nd century CE, they make a distinction between an argument that is for the sake of heaven and an argument that is not for the sake of heaven. And we'll have in a few moments, we'll have a chance to discuss what is for the sake of heaven, what is not for the sake of heaven. So any disagreement that is for the sake of heaven, l'shem shamayim, so we have the word machloket again, and l'shem shamayim, for the sake of heaven, will continue to exist. But one that is not for the sake of heaven will not continue to exist. What is a disagreement for the sake of heaven? This is a disagreement of Hillel and Shammai. And one that is not for the sake of heaven, this is the disagreement of Korach and his group. Okay. All right, so since this is a group that probably has studied a little bit of Torah, can anyone, if we can come up, let people come off mute for a moment, can anyone tell us what they're referring to with these examples? Can anyone tell us anything they know about Hillel and Shammai and their arguments, and Korach and his followers and their arguments? I see Amy has her hand up, and then Dee. Are we able to unmute?
Mm-hmm. Sure can.
Okay.
So any arguments that Hillel and Shammai had were very constructive because they were trying to figure out any nuance linked to religious observance. Like, all right, so you're supposed to have your Shabbat candles lit at sunset, right? Yeah, right. How about if the sun's invisible or something? Making conclusions like that. Whereas Korach was a rebellious leader, and others thought he was pushing too hard, or he was being egocentric or something.
Okay, thank you, Amy.
Very welcome.
I see Bob's hand up.
In honor of the recent experience of Hanukkah, Hillel and Shammai argued about, or disagreed, about whether to start lighting one candle on the first night and work up to 8, or to start with 8 and work down to 1.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, Korach was just in an ego-driven competitive thing with his cousin Moses. So that didn't work out well.
Yeah, so we have this sort of the Hillel and Shammai, a lot of times it's we want to do the same thing. How do we do it? And Korach, not so much. All right, D, so good to see you.
Yeah, good to see you. Something else that I took from the Hillel and Shammai arguments is the reason that the halacha follows Hillel is because when they made their arguments, they first explained Shammai's position in a way good enough for the members of Beit Shammai to say, yes, that is our position before they would make their own argument. So going even further into understanding the other person's argument.
Yes, so not only did they listen to the other person's argument, they made sure they understood it fully by asking more questions. And that was actually more of the purpose of the argument was, I'm just asking, it's sort of, playing devil's advocate, trying to get people to clarify what they mean so that we can understand them better rather than, attacking them and telling them that they're wrong. All right, Rabbi Streifer.
Yeah, just to echo that, what Dee just said, Tanya put into the chat, there was an honest desire to learn the other's position. So that echoes that idea. But I was going to say something maybe a little more cynical, which is that Hillel and Shammai are actually already part of the same group. We know that there were other groups. There were Sadducees and there were Essenes. There were people who weren't within this group. So Hillel and Shammai, for whatever reason, had decided to see each other as colleagues, as part of the same group. And we're told in the text that their children married each other, maybe not their own children, but the members of their house, of their schools married each other. So there's a sort of a desire to be compatriots while disagreeing versus groups that see each other as on the other side of a line.
Yes, we're arguing while we're at the same table sharing a meal. So we're arguing while we're in part of the same community. And that actually raises an important point is there were arguments that weren't being heard or recorded or allowed into the room or the table. So that's another question of who gets to be part of the argument and who doesn't. And that's kind of actually what Korach brings up is, why do only you get to make the decisions around here, but he doesn't necessarily go about it in the best way. Janet, can you unmute yourself?
Yes, I just started to type it into the chat. I was saying, isn't the purpose, I've learned this through Torah study in the different congregations I've belonged to over my lifetime, that the purpose of Jewish study is to ask questions and not necessarily to get an answer, but like one question leads to the next question, to the next question. And the goal isn't to get an answer, but the goal is to discuss the questions and learn from that kind of discussion, as opposed to like finding a quote correct answer.
Yes, and what you'll see a lot of, because sometimes you do have to decide how are we going to do this thing. But what you will see in rabbinic arguments is they will say, this rabbi said we should do it this way. This rabbi said we should do it this way. They argued it out for a while, and then the majority decided we would follow this rabbi. And then, by the way, this other rabbi says this. So, and that's all recorded. So whereas the law, the halacha, will probably eventually get to an answer, we also have these dissenting opinions that one might, for instance, there's a dissenting opinion in the Talmud as to this is my favorite, as to whether poultry can be eaten with dairy according to the laws of kashrut, because poultry, as we know, don't produce milk. So the idea of boiling a kid in its mother's milk should not apply to chicken. So while they do rule in the Talmud that you can't have chicken and dairy, they do record the argument of Yossi HaGlili, the argument of another rabbi, a minority opinion, who says, actually, this is okay. So even when they make an ultimate decision, there is respect for there being more than one, and that questioning is how we come to the answer. We don't just declare things. Okay, and then I saw, let's see. Oh, Alfred, thank you. I haven't actually, I think I haven't read the Inferno, that it begins with the wild woods, and that with Korach there weren't two sides. Oh, that's interesting. One could say there were two sides, but that's an interesting idea. Yes, it seems vitally important who we consider as part of our community, because who gets to be part of the argument and whose argument gets to be recorded, even if it's recorded as being wrong. Okay, so and I think another thing I heard about Korach, because we were talking mostly about Hillel and Shammai, is that Korach's arguing had to do a lot more with power and ego. With Hillel and Shammai, they're trying to figure out the best way forward for their group, which, you know, technically is the group in power, whereas with Korach, he's trying to put a different group into power. So the argument is much more about power and ego. Yes. Right, and Tanya adds, Korach had already decided his side was the only one that mattered. And I think in his argument, he does ask questions, but they're kind of rhetorical questions. Okay, so we're going to keep going. Let's see what the rabbis have to say. All right. And which is the machloket that is for the sake of heaven? That of Hillel and Shammai, for one would rule on a matter and the other would disagree with him in order to understand the truth, and not just for the sake of provocation or a desire to win. So that's pretty much, you all anticipated what the rabbis would say. And this is Rabbi Meiri from 14th century France. Yes, so they are arguing for the sake of better understanding rather than arguing for the sake of winning the argument. Though we know we all love winning an argument. And which is the machloket that is not for the sake of heaven? That of Korach and his congregation. For they came to complain about Moshe Rabbeinu, may he rest in peace, about his leadership solely out of jealousy and provocation and a desire to win. And I think this is an interesting argument, and maybe this is a bit of a side note, but if you look at the question that Korach is asking through a modern lens, he's asking, hey, can't we share leadership? Can't everyone participate? And that's actually an argument that today we might embrace. So we look to the rabbis for a little more explanation about why this was so bad. And it was because it was him sort of acting on his worst impulses, on being jealous, on being provocative, and on seeking power. Right. So yes. So it's somebody who wants. I really like that, Rabbi Streifer. But it changed Korach to Karachi, which is really funny. So if he just wants regime change rather than real systemic change, which is something that we notice in politics, is that, you know, a lot of times it feels like it's about our guy winning, not necessarily about what's actually happening on the ground. And we spend so much time in this country, we spend so much time with people running for office. They don't have as much time as they probably should have to do the things they need to do while they're in office. And after this most recent election, I decided for myself, you know, I still want to be involved in politics. I still want to be a good citizen and do my civic duty. I don't want to follow politics like it's a sport anymore, because that's not a healthy way of looking at it. Okay, so so throughout the Mishnah and the Talmud, we see pairings of rabbis who frequently spar with one another on issues of Jewish law and practice. But rather than presenting these pairings as enemies, we might actually today use the term frenemies. They are seen as a sword sharpening a sword. Arguing with a worthy opponent helps each rabbi to sharpen and to clarify their own rulings. And it's also important that in the rabbinic texts, the back and forth of the arguments themselves are recorded, as well as the final ruling and the dissenting opinion, which we actually also see in the United States. We see in Supreme Court arguments. We have the opinion, but we also have the dissent. So this is a good reminder to us, even when we've made a decision, because sometimes we just have to make a decision. We can't argue forever, that there wasn't necessarily only one right answer. There was just the answer that we chose to move forward with. Okay. So having seen this, wait one second. Yes, also Bob adds the idea of kavruta, which, and D adds the idea of one can be right, but coming with a destructive attitude can cause more damage than constructive change. Perhaps that was the issue with Korach. I've actually had this argument with several people I've offered what I think is counsel. I think it felt argumentative to the person. I have said sometimes, I see what you're saying and you're right, or you're not wrong, depending on whether this is a black and white issue. But how much time do you want to spend arguing this? And or is it worth it to have this argument and just to be right when it's not really going to change things in a tremendous way? Yes. So Alan says spending money to get elected is making an argument for yourself that is not for the sake of heaven. Yeah, money in politics gets to be really complicated. And Rabbi Streifer adds, Judaism can hold two truths, even in a case where the rabbis believe you have to choose one answer for the sake of community cohesiveness. So yes, so a lot of us probably live, worship, study in different communities, and maybe we agree with 100% of what our community does. That sounds unlikely to me. So it could be, this is the community where I am mostly aligned with, and the places where I disagree, it's a disagreement for the sake of heaven. If I really felt this community was doing something unethical or wrong, I would not be part of it, or I would be agitating for things to be different. But being part of a community in some way says, I'm willing to stay and be part of this argument because I believe this is an argument for the sake of heaven. Okay, so yeah, and D, we're going to get to the 49-49. So patience, grasshopper, as my dad would say. Okay, so Bruce asks, how do we learn to hold two truths, or maybe more than two at the same time, without disparaging or disrespecting the truth or truths that differ from the one you believe it in? This is sort of the $1 million question, because I think one thing that we're struggling with, especially in the modern world of media, the modern world of politics, the modern world of leadership, there isn't a lot of room left for nuance. And if you went to people in certain professions and said, oh, there are 15 different ways of looking at this, they would say, no, there's not. There's just the one way. And basically, whoever shouts the loudest wins. But really, a lot of things, some things are not nuanced, but most things are. And for most things, it's, we need to actually sit down and discuss this rather than get into a screaming match about who's right or wrong. Because more often than not, some people might have parts of their argument that are correct, and some people might have had parts that are incorrect. And again, we could use these arguments to sharpen one another. Did you think of this? Did you think of that? Right. And a lot of it, Beth, does come down to, we ridicule people. We say, oh, if you think that, you're stupid, or if you think that you're wrong, that is a way of ending the conversation without anybody having any growth, including the person you're arguing with. They're not going to say, oh, that person called me stupid, I should really go and educate myself. Yes. Right. And yes, and Rabbi Streifer's asking questions rather than preparing your argument while you're listening, which many of us do. So we're going to pause for a second. Having seen the commentary, what are some of the qualities of machloket l'shem shamayim, from the disagreement for the sake of heaven? I think Tanya had their hand up. It disappeared.
Tanya, if you can raise your hand again, I will allow you to unmute.
Faith Joy adds humility as one of the qualities of a machloket l'shem shamayim. And Tanya's hand's up again.
Yes. It's not funny, but one of the things I was thinking about I am sure we have all heard of the flat earthers.
Mhm.
And I am embarrassed to say that I was the person that was like, they're idiots. And I mean, I got into this high horse and I was so self-righteous about it. And then I was like, you know what? I really don't even know what their argument is. Like, I don't even know where they get this outlandish ideas. I just flat out label them idiots. And I was too smart. And I don't even know about science. Okay. I'm not even a big science person. And so, but I decided that they were stupid and I was not. And so then I started listening. I even listened to a couple of documentaries and I said, you know what? They're curious about the world as well. And granted, I even at the beginning, I was telling my husband, I'm like, I understand where these questions are coming from. I'm like, it was when I came exactly what the rabbi, I'm sorry, I don't know anyone's name. This is my first time here. I was saying I was already preparing all my arguments against them. And then I'm like, wait a minute. The questions that they're asking are very valid questions when you actually stop to listen. And I personally learned so much, even about physics, because I'm like, wow, okay, that's a really good question. It was no longer about when I came, like it was mentioned here, from a point of like, hey, look what, I don't have all the answers, or I'm not necessarily like 100% right, but even at the end, obviously, you know, neither, I'm sure I would not be able to convince them to come to my side, and they were not able to convince me to go to theirs. It was very interesting to see where they were coming from, and to, at least now when I think about him, I always, in the moment that I catch myself being so self-righteous and being like looking down from my high horse, I remember that because I'm like, whoa, okay, I was able to learn so much from the flat earthers. I think I can, you know, stop and just listen instead of, and you can always learn. So I think that makes, for a destructive disagreement would be one where no matter what you say, my intention was never to even learn about you or to even change, not necessarily change my position, but it was just to prove you wrong or to ridicule you or so I, anyway, that I just I don't know why that's what came to my mind, that because that was one thing that I was so self-righteous and arrogant about, and it was actually very humbling.
Yeah, and that's a wonderful experience, because I think not a lot of us would have had the patience or the openness to do that. And um, I think that one thing that we worry about, as far as information is concerned, we're worried, oh, if we give any credence, or if we even look at somebody else's opinion of things, our opinion's going to be corrupted. Well, if that's true, our opinion's not necessarily that. Our argument might not be that strong. The rabbis wanted to have the strongest possible argument, so they really wanted to know what other people thought, or at least the other people who were around the table with them. And I do see this a lot in the world today, in that people are worried, oh, if someone's exposed to this idea, they're going to be changed by it. And it's, well, actually, no, we need to teach everybody critical thinking skills so that they can engage with another idea and not agree with it. Or maybe be changed by it, but to know that they're making that decision for themselves and not being indoctrinated. So Janet adds to our list of qualities that listening to others is key. Alan says 2 opinions can certainly be correct. One can also be more correct or relevant than the other. So yeah, there are facts. There is truth. There are things that are indisputable, but there can also be conversations about, well, why does somebody think this? Why does somebody think that? And is there common ground? And also, are there things we can learn about the other person's argument that'll help us understand our own position better? Okay. Okay, so Margot says, Tanya is suggesting that we seek or appreciate commonalities, but one can hold the place one is at and seeing the other. So yes, you can hold your own beliefs, and also because you do sort of want to know what you might want to know what people believe. I think sometimes it's helpful to look at different sources on a topic to see what different people are saying. So Sarah adds, when we cultivate curiosity rather than our point of view. Marion says the saying labeling is disabling, from Marion Kent. Merle says, for the sake of heaven may benefit arguing parties as well as those who are present or reading about the argument. It's a broadening experience. So yeah, so this is not an argument that happens behind closed doors. This is an argument that happens out in the open so that everybody can sort of see how it unfolds. Elaine adds, questioning our own assumptions is always healthy. Evan says, being comfortable with some uncertainty, i.e. I may not be the only one with the right answer. Okay. All right, I'm just checking to see if we have any other responses. Oh, so Todd asks, again, $1 million question. How do you engage people with a constructive dialogue when they don't want to and or hold the opposition's viewpoint in question or ridicule them? Sometimes the path to respect, understanding, knowledge, and empathy through conversation is very difficult. Yes, it is. And Tanya's example is great because it was, I wanted to know more about this. And you don't necessarily want to call up your local flat earther and say, hey, can you tell me what you believe? But if there are these other resources that you can look at a calm way, that you can have time to digest it, you can pause the TV, you can put the book down, you can make your counter arguments in your head, but then go back to looking at what you're reading. I think there needs to be space made for it. Yes, and there are going to be times when you can't have that kind of argument. And sometimes there is a need to walk away. Right, and then you can also respect people's choices not to have a discussion. Yes, Stephen Covey says, seek first to understand, then to be understood. Okay. Being willing to be willing to disagree, but with grace. Being willing to compromise. Be curious, not furious. Oh, I like that. Faith Joy. I've been using from Ted Lasso, which I think it was whoever it was attributed to, it was misattributed, but I know it from Ted Lasso. Be curious, not judgmental. And there's definitely a couple of times, I think some of the biggest mistakes I've made in my own life and career have been when I assumed something and made a judgment rather than starting with a question, saying, hey, why did you do that? And what did you mean? Yes, we have a lot of, Marilyn points out, we have a lot of echo chambers. Yes, so I want to make sure that we go through, but I see these recurring themes of being comfortable with uncertainty. There's definitely going to be, and there definitely are going to be things where there's a right answer, but that we also need to put our right answers to the test. A lot of the things we know now through science were tested very rigorously. And anything that is proven scientifically, at least to a point, anything that's proven scientifically has had to go through a very rigorous review process. Okay, let's keep going. I'm sorry if I didn't read your comment out loud. Okay, so here's where we get to, Dee pointed out this idea of the 49 and the 49. So Rabbi Yanai says, the Torah was not given in a clear-cut matter. Rather, on every statement that God said to Moses, he would say 49 reasons or faces the matter could be pure. And these are for things where you do actually have to make a yes or no ruling, pure or impure. And 49 reasons why the matter could be impure. Moses said to him, Master of the universe, when will we know the truth or clarification on this matter? He said to Moses, go according to the majority. If the majority rules, it is impure. It is impure if the majority, and if the majority rules that it is pure, it is pure. So we have this idea that there are possibilities for there being multiple right answers, and it's up to the community to pick one, which is kind of a radical thing when you're talking directly to God. So God is reminding Moses that there isn't necessarily one right answer, even when we're talking about a commandment that comes directly from God, something that you would think would be really clear. And also that it's incumbent upon us as human beings to figure these things out for ourselves and not always count on divine intervention. And there's a famous story in the Talmud where the rabbis are arguing, and one rabbi is so certain that he is right that he summons miracles from God to prove that he's right. And it actually happens that he is right. This is what's really interesting about this story. While he is correct, after all of these miracles, so the miracles are that a tree uproots itself and walks across the lawn, that a river next to the Beit Midrash starts running the other way, and then there's the walls of, this is my favorite part, the walls of the Beit Midrash start to cave in, and then the rabbis literally say, walls, this is none of your business, and the walls, rather than straighten up or go completely down, they stay halfway in between out of respect for both sets of rabbis. And it says, though we don't, obviously this place doesn't exist anymore, and they are standing that way to this day. So I've also heard that's why the mezuzah is on the side, because people were arguing over whether it should be horizontal or vertical. But I don't have the tech support for that. And then ultimately this rabbi, who knows that he is right, says, if I am right, there should be a voice from heaven saying I am right. And a voice from heaven does come and say, this rabbi is right. And the majority rabbis who have ruled in the opposite way quote the Torah back to God and say, lo bashamayim hi, the Torah is not in heaven, which is something you hear in the Yom Kippur morning Torah portion. So they're basically saying, you gave us these laws and this Torah to interpret as we see fit, and there aren't going to be divine voices making these decisions for us. We make them for ourselves. And the coda to this is that someone asks, what did God do when the rabbi said this to him, to God? And God responds laughing, saying, my children have defeated me. So basically, good game, everybody. The people won in this, the majority wins in this case. So this leads us to one of the key principles of Machloket Matters, which is to recognize that in every encounter, that in every encounter, each side might have as many as 49 reasons to support it and 49 reasons to contradict it. And that we need to seek to understand those reasons in order to have a meaningful conversation with those with whom we disagree. So here are some potential reasons that we might want to engage with someone with whom we disagree. We could be enlightened by their 49. Oh, I never thought of it that way. Either I'm going to change my position, or my own position has become strengthened from this new piece of information. We could be that we are in a relationship with this person or this entity that we hope to continue. So a family member, a coworker, a partner in our social justice work. That's something that I feel like has come up very, very much in the last few years, that we've had all these coalitions that we're doing social justice with, and then new arguments have emerged and new issues have emerged that, whereas we've been in alignment about everything before, or mostly, now there are some things that threaten to tear us apart, but we want to keep doing this good work together. So how do we answer those questions? How do we understand each other better as individuals, better as groups from different backgrounds, so that we can continue to do this work that we do agree on together? And then sometimes we have no choice. We have to work together and come to a place of agreement or understanding in order to get something done. So with that in mind, we get the 4 pillars of Machloket L'Shem Shamayim, derived from Hillel and Shammai, and also you came up with most of them in the chat. The first one is active listening. Listen without trying to formulate a response, which is very hard. Stay curious, ask questions. Motivation. Consider why you are engaging. What is the goal of your argument? Are you trying to win and provoke, or to understand or solve? It must be issue-driven. Focus on issues without attacking people or harming relationships. And it must be grounded in truth. Be open to admitting that you might be wrong. Be open to admitting that you both might be right, despite holding different opinions. And I think there will be lots of situations, especially in some of the maybe lower stakes arguments that we are having, where you could go either way on this argument. You want to understand all the different reasons, and when you pick a reason, you're not necessarily picking which is absolutely right. You're picking what this group or this person is going to do in this moment. Okay, so how is it possible? And I feel like this was one of the scenes in Fiddler on the Roof. It's he's right and he's right. How can they both be right? You are also right. So you have this this question of how can we both be right? How is that possible? And one of the things that we consider in Machloket Matters is that the argument might issue from a different moral foundation than the opposing argument. So so we're not just coming from a different perspective, but we're even looking at a different framework. So some of the frameworks, and there might foundations, and there might be more, is care versus harm, fairness versus cheating, loyalty versus betrayal, authority versus subversion, sanctity versus degradation, liberty versus oppression. So so we have so even though we're probably taking multiple things into account, the argument that you're having, you might, by using this framework, notice that the person you're arguing with or the group that you're arguing with is coming at it from a different moral foundation. And that's why you're not making any necessarily making any progress, or you have to be able to use the language of that moral foundation to have that conversation. So the argument that I like to use is, and I've seen this now from both sides, when you are either the parent of a teenager or the child of, no offense to my mom because she's on this call, the child of a senior citizen, very young and vibrant senior citizen, is that you are, one of you is thinking about care and harm. One of you is thinking, don't drive at night, or one of you, and that goes for both arguments. I don't want you driving at night. You need to call me when you get where you're going. I don't like that person you're hanging out with. You can't go away for this long without calling me, that kind of thing. Mom and I have both been on both sides of that now. So that's a care and harm issue, but the person who's getting the care harm argument is probably having a liberty oppression foundation. They're probably thinking, I want to be independent and I want to do things my way and I shouldn't have to tell you everything that I'm doing. So these are that I think is a classic argument of people coming from different moral foundations. They're not wrong. The child or the parent needs to have a certain level of independence for lots of different reasons, but there is also a need on the part of the child or the part of the parent to keep their loved ones safe. So how do we balance those things? Okay, so I have not been able to keep up with the chat because it's been very active. Rabbi Streifer, has there been anything that I missed that we should address?
There's a lot in the chat about, one question that came up, which I think is a good one, is this is from Dawn, who says, I worry that in the name of finding middle ground and keeping the peace, we're sacrificing expertise. I have concerns about the, quote, I did my own research idea. So where does the question of truth play into this?
Yeah, and I think that's where the 49-49 comes in. And if you're in a 49-49, if both people or all people are in a 49-49 situation, you're hopefully drawing from research that is accurate, but you're understanding that there might be different things to consider. And I think that I did my own research often comes from somebody who doesn't have a 49-49, they just maybe have a 1. And similar to what Tanya was saying, you do actually want to know what their false argument is, but that doesn't mean it has credence in the room. And that's why this is very difficult work, is that, truth is a value. And it's been very concerning in the last few days, and though this has been a problem for years, that one of our giant social media companies said that they're not going to fact check anymore. And we have sort of started to have this fuzzy relationship with truth. So when we're having our 49-49, we should also be able to say that's actually not accurate. And one of my 49 is saying that one of your 49 is scientifically or otherwise inaccurate, and I can prove it. But sometimes that I can see how that could be really, and I experienced how that can be really exhausting when you're arguing with somebody and they're just wrong on a factual level. Not that their opinion is wrong, but that their opinion has come from misinformation. That is a problem.
Just to add to that, I don't know how much you're looking at the chat here, but Sarah just put in the chat, can we get beyond our differences of moral foundations if we focus on the common need that we can ferret out?
Yes. So I think the moral foundations, they're not to say, oh, if this person's talking about care and harm and this person's talking about liberty and oppression, you can't come to any kind of agreement. It's that knowing that this is where this other person is coming from is going to help you to make an argument, but also to consider where the other person is coming from. Again, in the family argument, the worried party, let's say, because it doesn't really matter what the age is, the worried party might want to wrap the other person in bubble wrap and make them stay in their room for their entire lives, but they can't do that. That's not practical. So they have to figure out a way, I know this person needs to have a certain sense of independence. How do I provide that while also fulfilling my need to keep them safe? So it's not that you have to choose one, or it's not that they put you in an impasse. It's that knowing that you're coming from different foundations can help you get over the impasse to say, this is what we're, yes. And it's not to say that this is always possible. There are going to be times when we have to walk away. And there are going to be arguments that aren't productive. This is about having a constructive argument. A lot of people you're going to have arguments with aren't on this call today. So a lot of them are not doing that. But if you're talking to somebody who is bringing in misinformation, or if you're talking to somebody who you feel like their opinion is unfounded, or actually their opinion can't be unfounded, but what they're saying is unfounded, their argument is unfounded, you can say, and you might not get anywhere, but you can say, what is your source? Why is it? Where did you get that information? Why do you think that? And you can do sort of a, have you considered this? I think this is where questions come in, saying, have you, yes. So Evan says, I can better appreciate your perspective, even though mine hasn't changed. Right. And I do, coming back to the original question about misinformation, I think that's right. I think we don't want to say, oh, maybe we can't compromise on everything. I forget where this came from. It feels like it came from a fortune cookie, but it's the one who stands in the middle of the road gets hit from both sides. So there are some things where we can say, oh, you could both be right. We can all occupy this space. But there are some times when we can't do that. And for that, we have to be open to having these constructive arguments. Okay. Another example that I like to use for the moral foundations argument, I've done a lot of work where synagogues and Jewish communities of different denominations have to work together. And one of the issues that comes up often is which ritual laws are we going to observe as a whole when we do something together? And often we're having a sanctity degradation conversation on one side. We might be having a liberty oppression conversation on another side. If somebody is saying, I don't, and this especially for me is, places where women aren't necessarily, female identified people aren't allowed to do something in a ritual space. For me, that's liberty oppression, but for somebody else, that's going to be sanctity degradation. And I'm not sure exactly where this would fall in moral foundations, but a lot of times it's, is the sanctity degradation argument keeping us from doing things together as a community, as if that is also not a value? How can we find a common ground so we can do things together? And for a while, at least in my experience, that meant, okay, we're going to just do everything according to the strictest laws. And some people are willing to do that and some people aren't, and then you risk excluding people. And that works the other way too. Oh, let's just not have any rules and everybody just sort of takes care of their own spiritual needs. Well, then you have people who don't want to participate from a more traditional side. So these are the kinds of things that we see. These are the ways I can explain the moral foundations without getting into politics, that we have been stumbling in there occasionally. Doesn't Rumi invite us to meet in the field between right and wrong? Possibly. Yes. Right. And Beth adds, leadership is important. We need leaders who can help people discuss. So yes, that is one of the challenges that we have now, is both in terms of leadership and in terms of media and academia, even, and learning and education, is that we don't always have people who want to sit with the 4949. And when we do, people might call them wishy-washy. People might call them unprincipled, because they're not just taking a stand and sticking with it and digging in their heels. So that is, and I think one of the reasons that Pardes has created this curriculum is that hopefully by having more people learn these tools, there might be space for people to, we might cultivate more leaders that can have constructive arguments. Okay, so that's, you have access to these slides later. That's more details on the moral foundations. This is from Viktor Frankl. Between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and freedom. And I think that space is really important, because that's the space where if we don't have it, we're going to just say, you're wrong and you're stupid and I'm not going to listen to you. And maybe even I'm going to be aggressive or violent towards you. If we take that time, it's, do I want to ask another question? Is it worth having an argument? Is an argument that we have going to be for the sake of heaven or not? And if not, maybe should I walk away, or should I stay in the space? Okay, so in closing, so this is Rabbi Shira Gluck's interpretation of the Amachai poem from the beginning. Amachai diagnoses the desire to be right as a condition that leaves us barren. Earth that is trampled down and hardened does not allow any sprout of life to break through. Humans who are unyielding will never grow. The trampled courtyard is a powerful metaphor for the way we harden ourselves to the perspectives and ultimately the humanity of others. When we are convinced that we are right and someone else is wrong, we run roughshod over the possibility of connection. Always insisting on being right, we become self-righteous. Amachai's remedy for this ailment is to loosen our grip and allow for a healthy amount of self-doubt. We don't always need to be right, and chances are that over the course of our lives, each of us is right and wrong in equal measure. But when we make space for uncertainty, we also make room for love. And she's written this in the context of the High Holy Days. This is the essence of Teshuvah, of the 10 days of repentance, to open our hearts to the possibility that we are not perfect, that we are not always right, and to seek repair. Thus, we are able to both ask others forgiveness and give it to those who ask it of us. We are called to be spiritual gardeners, to break up the hardened earth of our hearts, to pull out the roots of certainty, and to plant the seeds of love. So I want to thank everybody for being here with us today. I'm sure Rabbi Streifer has more to say. I don't know if we have time for questions, but I'll look back through the chat and see if I missed anything.
Sure. Well, so let me just say thank you to Rabbi Leah Berkowitz for this really interesting teaching. That image of the hardened heart, I think, is really important as we enter into Exodus right now, thinking about what it is to be right and wrong and to be curious, and how do you help foster dialogue in a political and religious culture where we are so much on opposite sides right now. A couple of quick announcements. First of all, thank you to our partners and our sponsors. Thank you to all of you for being here. This session will be posted on our YouTube channel, and our next session is February 10th with Rabbi Laura Bellows of Dayenu. We'll be studying From Anxiety to Action, Torah for Climate Justice.